The bell above the door tinkled with an oddly musical note as Mara stepped into the narrow cafe tucked between a locksmith shop and an abandoned theater. From the outside, it looked almost temporary, as though it had sprouted overnight from a crack in the pavement, all patchwork bricks and a sign painted in thin, hand-lettered strokes, hearth and hollow. Inside, however, warmth pooled like lamplight. Small wooden tables clustered in gentle disarray, each holding a solitary candle cupped in green glass. The air smelled of nutmeg and orange peel, and somewhere behind the counter, an old radio hummed a song whose lyrics Mara couldn't quite place. She slipped off her coat, unsure why she'd come. Stress had woven tight knots at the base of her skull. Deadlines at the publishing house, edits she couldn't finish, and the heavy knowledge that her younger sister's divorce hearings were the next morning. She'd meant only to take a shortcut to the metro, but the glow of the place, the hush inside it, tugged at her curiosity. A barista with silver-streaked curls nodded from behind the espresso machine. His name tag read Ori in printed caps. First time? Yes, she said, surprised at the steadiness of her voice. Welcome. Ori gestured toward a chalkboard menu. Cappuccino, Americano, London Fog, simple, familiar. Yet each item was followed by a parenthetical, ash, cedar, fir. Tree names rather than sizes. She hesitated. Sizing, Ori clarified. Ash is small, cedar medium, fir large. Which branch is calling your name? What do you recommend on a rainy Monday? Depends on what you need to hear, he said, and winked, as though that were a perfectly reasonable answer. The maple mocha's been particularly chatty today, if that helps. She ordered one out of impulse, or a tamped espresso, frothed milk, sprinkling cocoa with a flourish. When he set the mug on the counter, the handle was turned precisely toward her, steam curling like a lazy cat. The surface gleamed with perfect microfoam, but before she could compliment the artistry, Ori had already busied himself washing pitchers, leaving her alone with the cup. Mara carried it to a table near the window where dusky light seeped through rain-beaded glass. She inhaled the aroma first, rich and sweet, then took a tentative sip. The foam clung to her upper lip. She licked it away and looked down. Words, letters traced in white against the darker brown, drifting into legibility as though a soft breath guided them. Speak your truth. She blinked, nearly spilled the mug. Her pulse skipped. When she glanced around, no one else seemed to notice. A bespectacled college student read a thick philosophy text. A pair of construction workers in fluorescent vests whispered over hot chocolate. A gray-haired woman knitted a red scarf, needles clicking, a steady heartbeat. None looked her way. Mara leaned closer to the mug. The message held its shape, the foam neither dissolving nor swirling. Speak your truth. So simple, yet it pricked a tender spot behind her ribs. The last time she'd confronted an editor about unrealistic deadlines, she'd faltered, afraid of being labeled difficult. She'd watched her ideas reshaped, misattributed, and said nothing. Coffee fortune-telling, she murmured, amused despite herself. Still, she felt the urge to open her phone, draft the email she'd been avoiding. Her fingers hovered, but anxiety nodded again. Maybe after I finish the drink, she thought. The warmth seeped through the ceramic into her palms, and she let it linger there until her shoulders loosened. When she finally stood to leave, she noticed the canvas pinboard near the door. Dozens of handwritten notes hung from pushpins, scraps of receipts, napkins, even torn notebook margins. Different inks and handwritings, but the same shape of gratitude. Thank you for reminding me I can do hard things. Took the leap, got the job, proposed today. She said yes. Mara added nothing, yet something gentle thrummed beneath her sternum, like a small bird stretching its wings. Outside, the rain had eased. She walked toward the metro and, on the escalator down, drafted the email. Short, direct. By the time she boarded the train, she'd hit send. The next afternoon, she returned, half certain the first visit had been a trick of exhaustion. The bell chimed the same crystalline chord. Ori grinned. Back for more advice? Back for more coffee, she hedged. Alder latte today, he announced before she could order, as though the decision had already been made in some moss-carpeted forest of possibilities. She didn't argue. She carried the latte to the same table. Foam swirled, settled, shaped itself. You are not your sister's keeper. Her breath caught. The divorce hearing had ended hours earlier. Mara had spent the morning gripping her phone, awaiting updates she couldn't control. She loved her sister fiercely, but the constant phone calls at midnight, the financial burdens, the emotional currents let them yank her from shore. Guilt had become her second spine. Not your sister's keeper, it wasn't license for abandonment, it was permission to release ownership of pain. Tears blurred her vision, quick and stinging. She wiped them with her sleeve before anyone could notice. The mug sat steady in her hands, radiating warmth. She whispered, "Thank you," feeling oddly foolish, then wondered whom she was thanking. Ori, the coffee, the cafe itself? On her way out, she paused at the pinboard, plucked a blank order ticket from the stack, and wrote, "Your words came at the perfect moment," slid the note onto an empty pin. Mara told no one about Hearth and Hollow, but the city, it seemed, carried whispers on the wind. 1 week later, as she arrived for her habitual maple mocha, she recognized the tall figure in rumpled scrubs, hunched over the corner table. Dr. Reuben Singh, orthopedic resident at St. Amelia's, she'd met him at a mutual friend's party months ago. He looked exhausted, hair flattened beneath a surgical cap he'd forgotten to remove. She said hello. He smiled weakly, eyes darting to his mug. "Hey, Mara, right? Weird question, but does your coffee ever say things?" Her pulse ticked faster. Mine did. Yours too? He turned the cup so she could see. She expected the order to fade under her gaze, but it remained distinct. "You saved a life today. Let yourself feel it." Reuben exhaled. "Rough night shift. Lost a patient in the ER. I kept thinking maybe I shouldn't be doing this job, but you saved one, apparently." "That's the thing. I did. An 8-year-old with a shattered femur. I set the bone, got her into surgery, stable. And all I can think about is the one I couldn't help." His voice cracked. "Ridiculous, huh? But then the cup, it's like it knew." Mara sat. They spoke for nearly an hour. She learned he loved comic books, sketched superheroes in the margins of medical charts to calm himself. She told him about the publishing house and the editor who had actually agreed to her timeline demands after her firm email. When duty pulled him back to the hospital, he left a note on the pinboard. "Remember what heroism feels like." So began a gentle unfolding. Mara visited every few days, discovered the place rarely crowded, but the patrons rotated like cast members in a quietly luminous play. A high school girl, fretting about college applications, found the phrase, "Your art matters, even if no one grades it." An elderly man whose tremoring hands spilled tea read, "It is not weakness to accept help." A new mother, eyes bruised with sleeplessness, stared at "Because you love, you are allowed to rest," and began to cry, her laughter mixed with tears. No one mentioned the messages outside the cafe, as though they existed in fragile equilibrium that speaking aloud might shatter. Yet something pooled beneath the surface of the city. Mara noticed small, courageous acts. A bus driver pulling over to comfort a shaking passenger, a street violinist changing his set list to match the tempo of falling snow, her own editor praising an intern's idea in front of the entire department, something he'd never bothered to do before. It felt like standing in drizzle that only revealed itself under lamplight. Subtle, persistent, refreshing. 3 months after her first visit, Mara arrived to find the cafe unusually full, voices buzzing. On the wall opposite the pinboard, a city council notice had been taped. Notice of proposed demolition and redevelopment. The abandoned theater next door, along with 3 adjacent buildings, including, by technicality, Hearth and Hollow's sliver-thin footprint, would be raised to birth a parking garage. Mara's stomach plunged. Ori poured drinks, face serene but eyes stormy. She ordered her customary maple mocha. Stephome wrote, "Courage is collective." She stared. Collective, of course. Quiet courage could ripple. Perhaps it was time to roar. She found Reuben's number, texted him. He arrived after his shift, still wearing scrubs, flanked by 3 nurses he'd recruited. The high school artist came with a portfolio tucked under her arm. The elderly man with tremors brought his daughter to help steady his hands. Patrons who'd never met recognized each other by the soft way they regarded their mugs, as though seeing old friends. Maury emerged from behind the counter, wiping damp palms on his apron. "I can't pay lawyers," he confessed, "and the lease is complicated, but maybe there's a loophole." Marie took a breath, felt the foam's words settle like armor. "Then we'll find it together." Over the next week, the cafe became headquarters. They collected signatures for a petition, photographed the century-old brickwork of the theater and the cafe's reclaimed wood interior. The artist painted watercolor flyers declaring, "Save our corner of courage." Ruben contacted former patients who flooded social media with stories of the cafe that kept their doctor upright when grief threatened to bow him. The mother with the newborn organized a bake sale. The bus driver offered free rides to City Hall on petition day. Still, bureaucracy loomed. The developer boasted deep pockets and political pull. At a public hearing, their group crowded the backbenches. The council chair, gray-suited and pressed, seemed unmoved. Mara spoke anyway. She read testimonies, described the messages in foam without naming them magic, called them intimate encouragements that fortified citizens in invisible ways. She cited statistics on mental health benefits of community spaces. She finished with a truth she hadn't known she'd say. Courage is quiet until the moment it must be heard. We're asking you to listen. Silence followed. The gavel struck. Deliberations would continue. Late that night, back at Hearth and Hollow, only a handful remained. Ori locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and brewed one final round. He handed Mara her mug. This time, rather than retreat behind the machine, he pulled up a chair. "I never asked," she said gently, "but how does it work?" Ori traced a finger along the rim. "Years ago, my partner and I traveled through the Carpathians. We stumbled upon a monastery renowned for its hospitality, though we weren't religious. The monks served us chicory coffee. On the surface, messages bloomed, different for each. Mine said, 'Forgive yourself.' His said, 'Stay.' We'd been fighting, we stayed, talked until dawn. When we left, an elder pressed this. He lifted a small carved wooden spoon from his apron pocket into my hand, told me kindness breeds in spirals. I didn't understand until I opened this cafe. First morning, I used the spoon to swirl foam, and the words appeared. Haven't stopped since." It's the spoon, then? Maybe. Or the intention behind it. Or the drinker's deepest voice rising. He smiled. "Doesn't matter, does it?" She looked around. Candles flickered, though no draft stirred. The cafe felt alive, like a listening heart. "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." Her mug read, "Speak together tomorrow." By dawn, their petition surpassed 10,000 signatures. Local papers ran headlines. A radio host invited Ori and Mara for an interview. Ruben's hospital colleagues posted photos holding coffee cups with hand-drawn foam letters, an homage to the magic none could replicate, but all believed in. The developer's lawyer filed an injunction to expedite demolition. Time narrowed like a funnel. On the eve of the final vote, a thunderstorm raged. Power flickered in Hearth and Hollow, but held. Patrons huddled, not talking much. The hum of rain, their communion. Ori brewed tea for those jittery from coffee. The young artist paced, muttering design ideas for protest signs. The elderly man practiced his speech aloud, voice quavering but determined. Then the front door rattled open, wind flinging rain across the threshold. A woman stepped in, hood dripping. The candle shuddered. She pushed back the hood councilmember Lorena Hayes, the swing vote. Gasps rippled. Ori offered her a towel, unflustered. She accepted, removed her soaked coat, looked at the group. "I see I'm expected," she said dryly. "No," Mara said, stepping forward, "but you're welcome." Hayes nodded. "My aide brought me the petition. Impressive. Yet parking is scarce downtown. People avoid shows because they can't find spaces. That theater could flourish again if patrons had somewhere to park." Mara swallowed. "And if there's no Hearth and Hollow, a cafe can relocate." "Not this one," Ori murmured. Hayes's gaze lingered on him. "Your brew seems to have an effect. We listen," he replied. She inhaled, as if about to argue, but instead said, "May I have whatever you recommend?" Ori chose an elm espresso. He tamped, pulled the shot, watching her with quiet respect. He served it in a simple ceramic demitasse. Hayes cupped it, sipped. A long silence. Mara held her breath. Hayes looked down. Her eyes widened. She tilted the cup toward Ori, who shook his head gently. "Only you can see." She swallowed, blinked rapidly. "Excuse me." She turned toward the restroom, shoulders stiff. The storm outside eased. When Hayes returned, her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. She placed the empty cup on the counter. To no one in particular, she said, "I lost my husband 2 years ago to cancer. He loved coming downtown, but the parking issue always made it stressful. I filed this demolition motion, thinking I was honoring his memory, making the city more accessible." Her voice trembled, "But I see now that convenience isn't the same as care." Her gaze swept the room, landing on each person like a promise. "Your cafe offers something a garage never could." She lifted the towel and gently dabbed rainwater from the floor. Then she said, "I'll vote no." Relief exhaled collectively, a living sigh. Tears, laughter, applause tangled together. Ori asked softly, "May I know what the cup told you?" Hayes tucked a silver strand behind her ear. It said, "Love likes to linger in unexpected doorways." She offered a small smile. Apparently, this is one of them. The council voted against demolition. The developer withdrew, seeking friendlier parcels elsewhere. Local historians petitioned to designate Hearth and Hollow and the adjacent theater as heritage sites. Renovations began on the theater, aided by volunteers who chiseled old plaster and repainted faded murals. The cafe expanded into the lobby, installing mismatched sofas and hosting open mic nights under chandeliers that shed flecks of gold. Mara, awarded a promotion for spearheading a new imprint, edited a memoir by the elderly man, whose tremors did not hinder the clarity of his memories once Mara recorded them. The high school artist illustrated the cover. Rubin organized monthly health clinics in the theater lobby, free for the uninsured. Councilwoman Hayes sipped Elm espresso before each session, her aide claiming it made her dangerously compassionate. Yet the magic never became spectacle. Patrons still fell silent, reverent. When messages emerged, they still folded gratitude onto the pinboard, now 2 boards, then 3. One evening, Mara read a note scrawled in hurried pen. Thought courage was a roar. Turns out it's a whisper with good timing. She smiled, pinned her own beneath it. Thank you for teaching me to listen inward and outward. Spring unfurled jasmine scents through doorways. On the anniversary of her first visit, Mara arrived early. Sunlight slanted through the windows, painting the floorboards honey bright. Ori polished mugs, humming. "They're asking for a speech tonight," he said, meaning the volunteers organizing the theater's grand reopening. "I'd rather write than speak," she admitted. He handed her a cup without asking for an order. The foam was slow this time, letters emerging like seeds sprouting. Tell the story. Simple, unavoidable. At dusk, the theater-filled seats refurbished, velvet curtains repaired, music warmed the room. On stage, Mara stepped to the podium, fingers trembling. She scanned the crowd. Ori, Rubin, the artist, the mother now carrying a giggling toddler. Councilwoman Hayes. Faces she didn't know but felt she did. She began. "A year ago, I ducked into a little cafe to avoid the rain. I ordered a maple mocha. The foam told me, 'Speak your truth.' I didn't know foam could speak, nor that truth could be gentle, yet here we are, standing inside a resurrected theater because thousands of small, private messages knitted themselves into collective courage." She described nights of petition signatures, mornings of restless coffee brewing, the storm that brought a councilwoman to their door. Not everyone believed the magic, she said, but everyone believed the people transformed by it. That was enough. "The world won't always serve us steaming mugs of encouragement," she concluded, "but we can carry the warmth forward, each of us becoming a vessel. May every heart here today brew its own quiet courage and share it when the moment calls." Applause rose rich as choral harmony. From somewhere near the back, Ori's voice rang clear. "To Hearth and Hollow, to Hearth and Hollow," the crowd echoed, a toast without cups, yet filling the air with invisible clinks. Mara stepped aside, cheeks flushed, and in that instant felt a pulse beneath her sternum, familiar and new. She glanced to where Ori leaned against the doorframe, spoon tucked in his apron. He met her eyes, raised imaginary mug, tipped it, she tipped hers back. Outside, night pooled, moonlight glinting on the cafe sign, hand-painted letters glowed softly, as though each brushstroke remembered the hands that crafted it and chose to shine a little longer. Inside, candles flickered, pages turned, and steam curled upward, weaving silent sentences that would settle into hearts, unseen by any but the ones who needed them. Messages mild and mighty, coaxing another city full of whispers into the bravery of song. And so waves of quiet courage kept lapping at the shore of daily life, unheralded yet unstoppable, as long as there were hands to hold warm mugs, lips to taste sweetness, and souls ready to read the private, patient stories that rose from foam.